This is SBS News in Easy English. I'm Claire Slattery. The National Party leader, David Littleproud, says he does not support closing Australia's borders to Indonesia over foot and mouth disease at this stage. Concern is growing over Indonesia's outbreak of foot and mouth after viral fragments of the disease were found in pork products in Melbourne. Opposition MPs Karen Andrews and Barnaby Joyce have both called for the borders to be temporarily closed. But David Littleproud says that is not the coalition's position, although it shouldn't be ruled out either.
We don't believe that they should be taking this off the table yet, but it should be predicated on science. We need to have calm, and the fact that there is anxiety and fear within the community calling for this is a direct result of the inaction of this government.
The government has introduced sanitation mats at international airports to stop foot and mouth disease coming in on travellers' shoes. Federal Agriculture Minister Murray Watt has told the Seven Network travellers need to do their bit to protect Australia from the disease.
What we're asking people to do is if they've been in Bali, especially if they've been near livestock or on a farm, and for that matter there's a number of other countries around the world that have got foot and mouth disease as well. If you're coming back in from any of those countries, you've been near a farm, you've been near livestock, clean your shoes very thoroughly.
A new United Nations report says millions of refugees and migrants face worse health outcomes than their host communities. The report is the World Health Organization's first attempt to try to review the implications of migration on global healthcare policy. The WHO's chief, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, says refugees and migrants often don't get enough help.
They face multiple barriers, including out-of-pocket costs, discrimination, and fear of detention and deportation. Many migrant workers are engaged in the so-called 3D jobs: dirty, dangerous, and demanding.
The two remaining candidates running to be the next British Prime Minister have begun making their pitches to Conservative Party members. Either former Treasurer Rishi Sunak or Foreign Affairs Minister Liz Truss will succeed Boris Johnson as PM after Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt was eliminated in the final round of MP-only voting. Bookmakers have 46-year-old Liz Truss as the favourite to win the vote of the party membership. But 42-year-old Rishi Sunak says he's the only person who can win the next general election for the Conservatives.
The question now for our members is, who is the best person to defeat Keir Starmer and the Labour Party at the next election? I believe I'm the only candidate who can do that, and my values are also those of our members.
In golf, and Heinrich Stenson has been stripped of the captaincy of Europe's team for next year's Ryder Cup after defecting to the Live Tour. The 46-year-old Swede is the latest well-known golfer to switch from the traditional golf tours to the Saudi government-backed Live Tour. Those who have changed to the Live Tour have been allowed to play in events outside the control of the traditional golf tours, such as the 4 men's major tournaments. But the traditional golf authorities control the Ryder Cup, which gives them power to make this move in retaliation for Stenson's defection. Critics of the Live Tour say it is being used by the Saudi government to deflect from its human rights abuses, a practice known as sports washing. You've been listening to SBS News in Easy English. I'm Claire Slattery. Welcome to SBS News in Easy English. I'm Claire Slattery. Authorities have discovered a body in Queensland's southeast as a powerful offshore weather system batters the coast. Police are now working to identify the man who was found this morning near Sandy Creek in Nanango, about 2.5 hours northwest of Brisbane. Police say the man's death follows the rescue of several people in what they've said are quite dangerous situations, including from the roof of a car at Kingaroy. Queensland's Premier, Anastasia Palaszczuk, has asked residents to listen to official advice.
Of course, Queenslanders should pay attention, especially the southeast, about not going onto the beaches or into the beaches this weekend. We're expecting very large waves, and of course, if it's flooded, forget it. Rainfall
Totals of more than 100 millimetres have been reported in the Sunshine Coast hinterland, with the town of Mullaney among the hardest hit. Beaches on the Gold Coast have been closed because of the dangerous conditions. An inquiry has found that complicated legal language has made it hard for Victorians to understand and follow the state's COVID-19 pandemic orders. The State Parliament's Pandemic Declaration, Accountability and Oversight Committee spent months evaluating the Victorian government's response to COVID-19. The committee has recommended that the Health Department publish summaries of pandemic orders in language of a Year 7 high school level. Premier Daniel Andrews says the government will look into the recommendations.
We've provided RATs to families across the state, both public as well as Catholic and independent schools. That's continuing till the end of the year. I don't know that every other state's necessarily doing that, but if there's a view that we should do more again, always happy to look at that.
The federal government will double fees and penalties for foreign investment in Australia. The move was one of Labor's election promises and has been confirmed following a meeting of federal, state and territory treasurers in Brisbane today. The federal government says it's expected to raise $445 million, which will go towards funding its housing policies, especially the Help to Buy scheme. Treasurer Jim Chalmers says it will also improve the federal budget's bottom line.
Now, foreign investment is a good thing. It's welcome when it's in Australia's national interest. This will make a very small difference to the cost of buying a property in Australia, but it will make a very big difference to Australians and to their budget because it means we can fund other priorities.
In sport, and Jonas Vingegaard has massively extended his lead in the Tour de France. He's won the final mountain stage of the tour, leaving his main challenger, defending champion Tadej Pogačar, 3 minutes and 26 seconds behind him overall. Vingegaard is now the overwhelming favourite to win this year's race, but even with the finish in Paris this weekend, he says he is still keeping a narrow focus.
I was just happy that it finally ended. It was incredible hard, and of course I'm also really happy that I win the stage, and now there's still 2 more days to come before we are in Paris, so we need to keep focus, and we will take it day by day again.
You've been listening to SBS News in Easy English. I'm Claire Slattery.
Welcome to SBS News in Easy English. I'm Gareth Borum. The federal government will take the first step to abolishing the Australian Building and Construction Commission by stripping back its powers from tomorrow. Workplace Relations Minister Tony Burke says the ABCC has been politicised and was set up by the coalition to undermine unions and fair pay for workers. But employer and construction groups say the move will delay infrastructure projects and increase their cost. Opposition Workplace Relations spokeswoman Michaelia Cash says it will create chaos in the construction industry and has accused Labor of being beholden to the construction union.
This decision by the Labor government at incredibly short notice for industry is going to mean a huge economic impact right across Australia. At a time of rising inflation and rising interest rates, why? Why would you put this type of economic hardship on the construction industry?
Australia's Agriculture Minister says calls to close the country's borders to Indonesia due to the threat of foot and mouth disease are damaging. The federal government has already tightened quarantine measures to stop the spread of the disease into the country, labelling it the biggest biosecurity response in Australia's history. But opposition immigration spokesman Dan Tehan says the government has failed to respond to the concerns of farmers.
Farmers are incredibly concerned that the government is not taking the action that's needed and the action on the ground to protect them from foot and mouth disease. We've been told that sanitiser mats would be rolled out. They're not there at the airport. There are reports of travellers coming in this morning. Still no sanitiser mats in place, still not proper inspections taking place. Deep concern because we're hearing a lot of talk but no action.
Agriculture Minister Murray Watt insists industry experts support the government's action.
On Friday, I did a press conference with the President of the National Farmers Federation where she backed in the measures that we're taking and opposed the border closures. We've seen public comments from meat processors, from Cattle Council, from every possible farm group saying that the government is doing the right thing and that the opposition are the people who are driving hysteria.
The federal government is expanding Defence Force support to Australia's aged care sector, as more than a third of the country's aged care facilities battle COVID-19 outbreaks. Defence Minister Richard Marles has announced up to 250 Defence Force personnel will support aged care homes during the winter wave. The move is in response to requests from aged care providers and trade unions for more support, with the ADF due to withdraw its workforce from August the 12th. Richard Marles says after a meeting between federal health and defence officials, ADF medics will now be deployed until late September.
It's increasing from 30 to 250, so it's a considerable increase in the numbers of Defence Force personnel involved in clinical and non-clinical care. It's not a situation that can be there permanently, but we are seeing a really significant outbreak in our aged care sector, and so it is an important step to be taking over the next couple of months.
Overseas, and the Pope has arrived in Canada to deliver an apology for the Catholic Church's involvement in a series of brutal residential schools that targeted Indigenous children for generations. But First Nations leaders say the visit seems to be more about the Church than the thousands of children that are thought to have died in the residential schools, and the scores of others who survived. Victoria Archon, an elder from Alexander First Nation, says the visit has been long overdue, while Assembly of First Nations National Chief Roseanne Archibald says their people were not included in the planning of the trip and that their concerns had not been adequately addressed. She says she plans to attend the apology.
It's the only event I'll attend because it's on one of the former institutes of assimilation and genocide. And so I think it's important to be there with survivors.
To sport. And most of the Australian cyclists who competed in this year's Tour de France say they are happy with their performances, despite two riders having to pull out because of COVID-19. Nick Schultz was the top-placed Australian in 23rd place. Simon Clark won a stage of the Tour before both he and Luke Durbridge both had to withdraw after testing positive to the coronavirus. I'm Gareth Boreham, and this is SBS News in Easy English. Welcome to SBS News in Easy English. I'm Gareth Boreham. The Prime Minister has recommitted to the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full as the 47th Parliament opened with a traditional Indigenous smoking ceremony and welcome to country. Both Anthony Albanese and opposition leader Peter Dutton spoke at the ceremony, which first took place in 2008 under then newly elected Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. Mr Albanese says he hopes to bring more unity to this Parliament and urged MPs to seize opportunities to make a difference.
Don't miss the chance, because you're not here for that long. None of us will be. And when you're sitting on the porch thinking about what you did, you can either have a source of pride or a source of regret. No middle path. No middle path. Make it a source of pride.
Peter Dutton has previously admitted he made a mistake when he walked out of Parliament's 2008 apology to the stolen generation. The Climate Change Minister says the opposition has made itself irrelevant by opposing the government's 43% emissions reduction target, as Labor tries to end the climate wars. The government has been working with the crossbench, including the Greens, and has committed that this target will be a floor, not a ceiling, in the hope of securing the minor party's support in the Senate. Chris Bowen says the Paris mechanism will be part of the legislation which will ensure the target can only be increased in the future.
People who are constructive, like the opposition, have made themselves irrelevant to the process. Now, the Liberal Party, or at least the leader of the Liberal Party, perhaps not the entire Liberal Party, but the Liberal Party seems to not have received the memo from the Australian people on May 21, that it's time to end the climate wars.
Labor has the votes in the House of Representatives, but already Liberal backbencher Bridget Archer has hinted she could cross the floor to support the government.
I think, it's never your natural sort of starting point. I don't think anybody comes here and says, well, I want to be difficult or, to do that. And it's a difficult thing to do. I feel that I must always consider everything that I do here through the lens of the electorate of Bass first, the Liberal Party second, and myself third.
The Tasmanian MP crossed the floor of the last Parliament to stand with the then Labor opposition to protect trans children during the religious discrimination law debate. Homicide detectives have charged the mother of 3 children killed during a Port Hedland house fire with their murders. The woman will face Perth Magistrates Court today over the allegations, as well as 1 count of criminal damage by fire. Her 3 children, aged 5 months, 7 and 10, were killed in the Pilbara house fire last week. Sanitising mats have been rolled out at Melbourne and Perth airports as part of enhanced measures to prevent foot and mouth disease entering Australia from Indonesia. All arrival gates hosting flights from Indonesia have been fitted with the mats, which contain citric acid to kill any fragments of the virus. Similar measures are expected to be rolled out in airports across the country by the end of the week, as part of what Agriculture Minister Murray Watt has described as Australia's strongest ever biosecurity response. To sport, and an independent review into Scottish cricket has found the governance and leadership of the sport is institutionally racist. The review highlighted 448 examples that demonstrated such racism and found those who raised issues were ignored or sidelined. It uncovered what it described as a developing culture of racially aggravated microaggression. Cricketer Kazim Sheikh is one of the players who spoke openly about his experiences with racism.
I also was not getting selected when the team was not performing. When I complained, I was told, "You should count yourself lucky you are here," by senior staff and other senior players. I never ever heard that get said to a white counterpart in my whole time playing for the national team.
An anonymous survey was carried out as part of the review, with 62% of respondents saying they had experienced or witnessed incidents of discrimination in the sport. I'm Gareth Borum. This is SBS News in Easy English.
Welcome to SBS News in Easy English. The Australian Bureau of Statistics has released the Consumer Price Index, which measures household inflation, and for the June quarter it was 6.1%. That is an increase from 5.1% in the March quarter, and is the highest inflation figure since 1990. The data reflects an increase in the cost of living. Opposition Treasury spokesperson Angus Taylor says the government should have followed the Coalition's plan to address the cost of living.
We've faced a very tough context over the last 3 years. What matters is getting a plan in place which addresses the issues you face. Australians deserve that plan and they're paying the price for not having one.
New Labor Senator Fatima Payman has given her first speech to Parliament. The 27-year-old from Western Australia is one of the youngest members of the chamber and the first parliamentarian to wear the hijab.
Know that the hijab is my choice. I want young girls who decide to wear the hijab to do it with pride and to do it with the knowledge that they have the right to wear it. I won't judge someone wearing boardies and flip-flops across the street. I don't expect people to judge me for wearing my scarf.
The Queensland government has confirmed the state's taxpayers have paid more than $200 million for a quarantine facility that is about to close because it is no longer needed. The Well Camp facility near Toowoomba will stop accepting guests from next Monday, but will remain available should the state's pandemic response change. Deputy Premier Stephen Miles says there is no longer a public health requirement for dedicated government-built quarantine facilities. He also says while there are thousands of COVID cases in the state, it is up to individuals to play a part in reducing the spread of coronavirus.
The modelling is able to project those figures, but of course, as the Acting Chief Health Officer said at the weekend, the modelling is just a projection based on what we know right now. We can all change the modelling. We can all change that curve by following the health advice, by using masks, by taking care if we're vulnerable.
Australia's National Science Agency says the country needs to embrace solutions to climate change. The Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, known as CSIRO, has released a major report on 7 trends impacting Australia, with climate change among the most important of those trends. Speaking to the National Press Club in Canberra, CSIRO Chief Dr. Larry Marshall says a significant response is warranted.
We're living in a world full of volatility, uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity. And believe it or not, there's much more yet to come. Our future depends on our ability to understand the waves of disruption that are coming at us, to face the uncomfortable truths and respond together at scale.
To New South Wales, a new report shows shark nets are harming other threatened species. New government figures say the majority of animals caught in New South Wales shark nets last season were not target species, and just over a fifth were threatened. Of the 376 marine animals caught in the 8 months to April, 325 of them were non-target animals, including 14 endangered grey nurse sharks, 19 vulnerable green turtles, 16 endangered leatherback turtles, and 4 endangered loggerhead turtles. The nets caught 51 of the 3 targeted species: white sharks, bull sharks, and tiger sharks. Former US President Donald Trump has appeared in Washington for the first time since leaving office, repeating false election claims that sparked the January 6 insurrection on the Capitol building. Mr. Trump addressed an audience of hundreds gathered for a two-day America First Agenda summit, falling short of announcing plans to rerun for presidency in 2024. Mr. Trump ignored pressure from allies to spend more time talking about his vision for the future and less time speaking about the 2020 election result.
I always say I ran the first time and I won. Then I ran a second time and I did much better. We got millions and millions more votes. And you know what? That's going to be a story for a long time. What a disgrace it was. But we may just have to do it again. We have to straighten out our country. We had it there.
And in sport, Nick Kyrgios has withdrawn from the singles tournament at the Atlanta Open, but he may still be available to continue in the doubles with Thanasi Kokkinakis. He says he is very disappointed to have withdrawn from singles contention.
I've won this tournament once and, I'm playing probably some of the best tennis of my career, and all I wanted to do was come out here and give you guys a show, obviously just see what I was capable of, but I'm unable to give out my best performance today, and I'm just extremely sorry, but I'm going to keep my hopes up and maybe be able to continue doubles with Thanasi this week.
Kyrgios is believed to be dealing with a knee injury and also struggled with a shoulder issue through Wimbledon. Thanks for listening to SBS News in Easy English. Welcome to SBS News in Easy English. The federal government says inflation is expected to peak at almost 8% by the end of the year, putting more pressure on Australians who are already dealing with rising cost of living. Treasurer Jim Chalmers says inflation is predicted to hit 7.75% by December. He says inflation is expected to improve next year before normalising in 2024.
Australia is outperforming much of the world, but that doesn't make it any easier to pay bills at home. More Australians are in jobs than ever before, and that's a very welcome outcome, but fewer Australians are feeling confident about the choppy waters that our economy is in, because they see the impact that high inflation is having on their living standards in an environment where workers aren't getting wage rises sufficient to match those price rises.
Australia's Chief Medical Officer has declared monkeypox to be a disease of national significance. Paul Kelly says the declaration follows the World Health Organisation's announcement, calling the situation regarding monkeypox a public health emergency of international concern. In Australia, there have been 44 cases, the majority of which have been within returned international travellers. Meanwhile, an Australian filmmaker who spent 15 months in a Cambodian prison for espionage charges has written to the United States President and the new United States Ambassador to Australia, pleading for the release of Julian Assange. James Ricketson is now advocating both the US and Australian governments to release Mr. Assange and prevent his extradition to the United States. Speaking to SBS News, Mr. Ricketson says he invoked the words of both Joe Biden and Caroline Kennedy's late father, President John F. Kennedy, in his letters.
Both Joe Biden and John F. Kennedy both made statements about the importance of freedom of the press, the importance of the public being well informed about what's going on, even if what they are informing the public is embarrassing to the President or to the current administration.
The government has introduced legislation in Parliament to allow 11 million workers in Australia access of up to 10 days of paid leave to escape domestic and family violence. The leave also extends to casuals who are not normally eligible for sick leave, and employees would be paid the rate they would have on the day, including penalty or other bonus rates if the shift was offered and accepted. Workplace Relations Minister Tony Burke says the bill aims to remove one of the primary obstacles of leaving and getting help.
More than 68% of people experiencing family and domestic violence are in paid work. However, many can't leave violent situations without risking joblessness, financial stress, homelessness and poverty, leaving workers having to choose between their safety and their livelihood.
A-League team Western Sydney Wanderers have launched their season fixtures for the upcoming season in a multilingual content campaign. The video features Wanderers members, players and community leaders speaking in the languages of French, South Sudanese, Cantonese, Assyrian, Hindi, Greek, Burmese, Serbian and Croatian, Tagalog, Filipino, Urdu, Turkish and English. The content is part of the Wanderers' Multicultural and Inclusivity campaign, which aims to speak directly to the demographics of the Western Sydney region.
Sérieux? C'est contre qui notre premier match? À quelle heure? Ah, magnifique! Ah, c'est top, c'est top.
Waluo me bieno panel toro me watoro Mario icheng abichiel I Brisbane Road I Bar Makuma.
Hagasinkiya Jokado Jets without Jokal at Wonderland.
صوت خمسة بتوقع مشباخن حقتن طولي درقل Central Coast Mariners من قمن يحكي فيفا.
Overseas, Germany have qualified for their 9th Women's Football European final after securing a 2-1 win over France in the semi-final. Goals by German star Alexandra Popp in both halves helped the team overcome France. They will play England at Wembley Stadium in the final on Sunday. And in golf, Australia has been included in the 2023 tournament schedule of the Live Golf Series. The series, with Saudi Arabia support, announced a 14-tournament plan for next year, with 12 established team franchises and a chance for players to be either promoted or relegated through its series of Asian Tour events. There are plans for tournaments in Australia, North and Latin America, Asia, the Middle East and Europe. Thanks for listening to SBS News in Easy English. Welcome to SBS News in Easy English. I'm Marcus Megalokonomos. The federal government says it aims to overhaul a regional grants program following the release of a report that found Nationals held electorates were given preferential treatment. The Australian National Audit Office examination concluded that Nationals electorates received $100 million more than they would have if the money had been allocated based on projects with merit. Infrastructure Minister Catherine King says her team hopes to redesign the Building Better Regions Grants program to ensure it does not happen again. Meanwhile, Deputy New South Wales Liberal leader Stuart Ayres is expected to respond to new evidence that suggests he knew about a public servant being offered a New York Trade Commissioner job before the job eventually went to John Barilaro. Documents provided from the state government to Labor as part of an inquiry into the appointment reveal Mr Ayres discussed candidates for the position with Investment New South Wales Chief Amy Brown, and he even added a name to the recruitment process. Ayres previously said he kept himself distanced from the process and did not meet with the former Deputy Premier over the job. But Labor leader Chris Minns says the government's fingerprints are all over this scandal, and their story keeps changing.
Firstly, we were told it was arm's length of government. Secondly, we were told it had absolutely no ministerial involvement. Thirdly, we were told that there was no suitable candidate. All of the defences of the New South Wales government in relation to that position have fallen over.
A ministerial delegation is meeting in Canberra to discuss issues impacting people living with disability. Bill Shorten and Amanda Rishworth will lead the meeting on national reform in disability policy and implementation. But the timing of the meeting has raised questions about the government's willingness to provide accommodations for disability in Parliament, after a newly elected senator was denied permission to have an Auslan interpreter by his side during his maiden speech to the upper house. Independent Senator David Pocock had asked the chamber for the interpreter so that people who are deaf or hearing impaired could follow his speech in real time. The Greens consented to the Auslan interpreter on the floor. The government and opposition both said no. In other news, a human rights group has filed a legal complaint with a French court, alleging that Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince was complicit in the 2018 murder of US-based journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Democracy for the Arab World Now says it has waited 2 years for Mohammed bin Salman to visit France to file its 42-page complaint. Director Sarah Whitson called for French authorities to open a criminal investigation of Mohammed bin Salman, who they argue should not have immunity from prosecution. Salman is currently scheduled to meet with French President Emmanuel Macron for a dinner, but Ms. Whitson says that meeting sends the wrong message about human rights.
How on earth is Macron or Biden going to persuade the whole world to stand behind Ukraine because of democracy, because of the rule of law, because they oppose war crimes like the ones Russia is carrying out, when they are cuddling up and